All right. So now I'm going to I'll share the screen here. Again, welcome everyone who, sorry. I don't know what's happening here. Somebody tell me if you're seeing a thing that says worker power assembly, because you're not supposed to see that. Shoot, I just had it all set up earlier and now it's not. Hi. It's not working. Or I had it all set up. Okay, the slide is showing properly. Good. Okay. I'm trying to look at my notes. Okay, there it is. All right. Thanks y'all for your patience as if I haven't been doing Zoom for a very long time. Sometimes it feels like I haven't. Okay, again, welcome everybody to my talk today for the Amado Khaya Initiative on Asian Americans and environmental justice, right relations with the land. So this talk is part of a series of trainings for the AMPLIFY Fellowship, which is a project. Oh, shoot. I guess it's not advancing. Sorry, everyone. Minor technical difficulties. Shoot. What is it again? Isn't Mercury in retrograde, everybody? Isn't technology not supposed to work? Did I hear that from somebody? Because it is definitely not working for me right now. And I had it all set up. I was so proud of myself, but something is not working here. So I don't know why. Let me just get this going again. Sorry. Yikes. I'm sure that the chat's blowing up with some expertise on like Mercury and retrograde, because I know some of you. So, wait, so sorry guys. Some of you here. I see. Okay, I'm going to try one more time. The girl bossing too hard for the universe. That's funny. See, everybody's agreeing. You're in agreement. Mercury and retrograde. Okay. So, all right. Okay. Let me start with a land acknowledgement, actually. And again, let me know if if you're seeing the slide or my notes. Are you seeing the slide? Perfect. Okay. Thank you. We can start now. So the Amado Khaya Initiative, we want to start with a land acknowledgement, but we respectfully acknowledge the original peoples of the lands on which our office sits and from which many of you are Zooming. For us specifically, for thousands of years, and hundreds of generations, the Eastern Pomo and Lake Miwok people actively stewarded these lands and continue to steward these lands to ensure that they provided and continue to provide for all living things. We benefit from that stewardship in a myriad of ways. Today, we acknowledge the historical and ongoing impact of white settler colonialism on indigenous peoples of this place and recognize our responsibility to be in genuine solidarity with them in addressing and transforming the impacts of colonization toward a more just, liberatory, and sustainable future. So for this talk in particular is part of a series of trainings for the AMPLIFY Fellowship, which is a project that the Amado Khaya Initiative launched as part of its program in alternative media. And it's part of the broader LABAN Filipino Ethnic Media Collaborative. LABAN was created in response to rising anti-Asian hate that occurred during the COVID-19 pandemic. LABAN plays important work in narrative change, serving to challenge mainstream media accounts that often play into anti-Black sentiment and relatedly carceral solutions, especially in its coverage of anti-Asian violence and oftentimes Black on Asian violence. So our work is to challenge that. And part of the work that we do in challenging that is serving to uplift how white supremacy impacts the Asian and more specifically the Filipino community, since ultimately anti-Asian hate is a systemic form of racism rooted in white supremacy. LABAN is committed to supporting stories that highlight interracial solidarity. Just a little bit more about the fellowship. So again, this lecture, we've opened it to the public, but it is also part of the training actually for this fellowship. So AMPLIFY because Filipinos, we love acronyms. I love acronyms. AMPLIFY it stands for Activating Media Positively Leadership Institute for Filipino Youth. AMPLIFY. It's a program where our AMPLIFY fellows are trained in the technical skills required specifically for podcast production. At the same time, the fellows training deepens their ethnic studies analysis and builds their ethnic studies knowledge as they develop stories that uplift the Filipino experience in the Sacramento region. I know we're joined by one of our major trainers who's helping with both the technical piece of it, but also with the ethnic studies piece of it, Dr. Scott Suchitani, who is also, I think, in this room. I thought I saw that. So thank you so much. And of course, welcome back again, AMPLIFY fellows. I know it's been a month since we last connected, and really excited for the work that you are continuing to do in developing your projects. Now, this talk also serves as the kickoff for a major new Amado Khaya, or AKI, project as part of our program in Indigenous Solidarity and Environmental Justice, entitled "We Are Not Immigrants, Unsettling Asians in America." And this is really exciting because we are doing this project in collaboration with Dr. Ga-Young Chung, who is at the Department of Asian American Studies at UC Davis, where I formerly taught. And I'm sorry, Professor Chung, I know that there's a specific organization that you lead I think this was an older slide, but I think it's, what is the Seeds Collective? What is the name of the organization again, Professor Chung, if you don't mind putting it into the chat, just so I can make sure to acknowledge your work. Yes, the Asian American Seed Stewards. So this project is done in partnership with Professor Chung and with the Asian American Seed Stewards. It's based at UC Davis. Now, for those of you not already familiar with AKI's origin story, and it has multiple points of origin, but I'll tell you the story this way. AKI was ultimately born out of the Bulosan Center for Filipino Studies, which I helped to found in 2018 when I was still on the faculty of the Asian American Studies Department at UC Davis. The Bulosan Center itself was born out of the Welcome Project, which was an oral history, it still is, an oral history and digital archive project that documented the leadership and contribution of Filipinos to the California farm worker movement. And that was launched in 2013. So when you kind of think about the long origin arc, I guess, of AKI, you can kind of argue that it's been 10 years in the making, and perhaps even longer, actually, if you kind of look at other potential, different kinds of points of origin that ultimately led to where we are today. Now, due to the limitations of advancing community-engaged Filipinic studies in academia, the pandemic, which revealed the deeply anti-student and anti-worker dynamics of the UC system, along with the devastating loss of Amado Khaya, my son, and the namesake of AKI, I decided to retire early from the professoriate to start a whole range of initiatives, AKI being one of them. AKI continues the work of the Bulosan Center to advance Filipino studies, as well as ethnic studies more broadly. So one of the key kind of programmatic areas of AKI is ethnic studies, or specifically Filipino studies. But the other areas of focus for the organization are rooted in Amado Khaya's work as a community organizer. So I mentioned earlier, so one of our programs is alternative media. That's why we have the AMPLIFY project. We have a program in Filipinic studies, I just mentioned, program in indigenous solidarity and environmental justice. And this project really launches our work there. We have an ongoing program in healing justice, an ongoing program in community organizing. So though Amado passed at a really young age, 22, he accomplished quite a bit as an activist, and he worked on a very broad range of social justice issues that are reflected in our 5 programmatic priorities, and actually not fully, because there were other issues that hopefully we can grow into as we continue to evolve and grow as an organization. So the first part of my talk is going to really track the ways I kind of personally just kind of kwentuhan or talk story, or how I have come to center environmental justice activism, specifically through a new relationship with the land, and not in some abstract sense. I think a lot of us I think even before I sort of cared about the land, but it was far more abstract than the way I am in relation to the land now. But really now, where my family are in a very intimate relationship with the land as land stewards here on what many natives refer to as Turtle Island, on the very land where my family and I live our lives every day, the land on which our home sits, the land where our child plays, and just, beyond just the immediate vicinity of the land where we live. Of course, Turtle Island is the land where we are now burying our dead. My parents, my grandfather are buried in the soils of Turtle Island, the first among the descendants of my ancestors to be buried far away from the rest of their kin, the very first in generations. And so this relationship that I'm cultivating with the land, this is something that's still relatively recent. And so I really wanted to focus my talk a little bit, kind of talking story about my environmental justice origin story, if you will. Origin story is always fun, but I also feel like it's just a great opportunity for me in this talk to sit down and think a lot and critically self-reflect on my evolution as a community organizer, activist, and scholar. So the talk has 2 parts. I'm going to kind of talk about this sort of environmental justice origin story for me, and then ultimately this project. And then I'll talk a little bit about just Asian American environmental justice work, and introducing you to a whole range of ways that different organizations or different Asian American community organizers and activists do work to advance environmental justice, because there's lots of ways to approach it. What I will tell is one particular story and one particular kind of approach, but there's so many ways in which we're advancing environmental justice as an Asian American community. And then hopefully we'll have some time to end our time together in conversation. So let me just start with my environmental justice origin story. So to begin, really my journey towards centering environmental justice is in a much more serious and central way, probably really started in the pandemic. For me, the pandemic really, really made me take pause. It made our family take pause. We felt, and I don't know how many of you might have felt this way. Actually, maybe this will be a fun opportunity for some interaction. But if you felt this way, and this is something that was observed by writer Robin Maynard in her 2022 co-authored book with Leanne Simpson in their book, Rehearsals for Living. They're both BIPOC organizers based in Canada, is the crisis that is this pandemic is by no means separate from the ecological crisis. It's not that we weren't warned. As so many scientists have noted, a shifting climate made another pandemic nearly inevitable. If this is something that resonates with you, please say yes somehow in the chat. I have the chat open. I don't have everybody else open, so I can't see other reactions. But can you just say, I don't know, maybe you could do a thumbs up to the link that Anna just posted in the chat if you feel like this was something you were thinking during the pandemic, because certainly this is something we were thinking. So, this shift, really starting to think about what does it mean to center environmental justice is something that really started for me during the pandemic. Now, was at the time, 2020, Amado was actually already in the Philippines, and it was going on 2 years by 2020. In 2018, he had decided to go back to the Philippines full time to learn from and support indigenous communities there. Because the prior year, in 2017, he was part of a delegation with the International Committee for Human Rights in the Philippines to do sort of fact-finding and building relationships with indigenous communities there. So, 2017, he went for a quick trip. Then by 2018, he was like, I'm going to do this. I want to stay here full time. And so by 2020, in the pandemic, he had been there already for 2 years. Just kind of speaking about that initial trip that got him to the Philippines for the first time. And this was really from a blog from the organization that he was also leading, Anak Bayan East Bay. One way that they described that trip was that an objective of the trip was connecting movements resisting state repression. Everywhere we shared stories from Standing Rock and the Solidarity delegations that many of our members and allies went on to defend indigenous land from oil corporations. This was an important point of connection to make with the Laingod Manobo people who are indigenous to the Pantaron Mountains of the southern Mindanao region of the Philippines. So, he was on this trip in 2017. Standing Rock was also happening. So all these connections are starting to happen. Meanwhile, he decides to go back 2018. By 2020, he's still there. Now, Amado unfortunately ended up passing away not long after we taught. I think I jumped ahead a little bit more than I had anticipated. I'm sorry. But anyhow, one of the things, I was freaking out when Amado was there. Of course, I was a mom. Who doesn't recall being freaked out and absolutely terrified when the pandemic hit? It was, the apocalypse was upon us. And it was frightening. I'm thinking already, gosh, we have to do something. This is this is capitalism's fault. We've done something here. This is what's prompting this crisis. I'm trying to reach out to Amado. Amado had already, he was in the island of Mindoro, helping out a indigenous community there that had been hit by a typhoon in late 2019, and then another typhoon in early 2020. Then he had gone there to help out in the rebuilding. When I was finally able to connect with him, it was so interesting because here we are completely panicked. And Amado was just really chill. He's like, you know what, Mom? It's good. That what he was sharing was this deep sort of confidence in the indigenous communities he was with, that there was all of this knowledge, intimate land knowledge. So it wasn't like he was confident that the indigenous people would figure it out because, natural disasters happen all the time. It was something else. It was that indigenous peoples were going to be able to survive because of this deep, deep, intimate relationship with the land, with their land. And so Amado, the pandemic had hit, but he didn't have much fear. He really trusted the science, indigenous science that had been kind of developed over thousands and thousands and thousands of years to somehow really manage a crisis and get us in the right direction. And I remember he said to me, Mama, I really, really think y'all have to do it. You're going to have to also, part of what we will all need to do is reconnect to land. And he had said, Mama, I think you really have to try to find a way to get land, learn from, be in relationship to the land, be in relationship with indigenous communities. And pretty much that was the last time I had a conversation with him. He ended up dying not long after this conversation. But I know, though, that his death did not have to do with living with indigenous peoples. That wasn't the issue. The issue was death due to these larger systems, neoliberal globalization, imperialism, racial capitalism, all the things that are responsible for the genocide of indigenous peoples and cultures. The elimination of this database of land knowledge through the genocide of indigenous peoples and cultures. These are the systems that were responsible for the degradation of the land, of all humans and non-human life that it sustains. These are the systems that ultimately were responsible for why, despite all of his hope and despite all of this knowledge that he was learning and the knowledge that's there, and because these systems continue to exist, at the end of the day, when he needed the help, he couldn't seek out the medical help he needed when he was ill, and then he passed in 2020. So now, for me, the conversations with Amado never stopped. Not with his death. They continued on even after he transitioned. I often felt like I was in conversation with him, always challenged, always by what he had said, those last words that he'd left with me. I deeply felt that I had to reflect on my relationship with the land. Again, of course, we were also continuing to be in the pandemic. And really had to reflect on what it meant that I was on this land, I was born on this land, my entire life spent on this land. My descendants, at least, if not through Amado, through my second son, would be on this land. And so I had to reflect on relationships with indigenous caretakers here where I live, who've tended to, again, this land for thousands of years, ensure that the resources of it of the land were maintained so they could be used to sustain the lives that, I and my family have. And all of that tending, right? Tens of thousands of years, far longer than the existence of the United States as a country. And it was that tending, right, of those resources that the U.S. has then, completely extracted, right, dispossessed people, stole this land, and labor, right, exploited the labor of the peoples here. So I think, through these conversations, the pandemic really made me feel like I have to do more than just these land acknowledgements. I have to make my relationship right with the land. And it was really through these reflections that I really came to realize that I needed to grapple with my relationship really with settler colonialism. And that really then led me to this deep, deep dive into Native American studies, which, in 2020 was actually relatively new for me. I started reading lots and lots of books. I started reading books like that by this one by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, among others, read many others. But this particular quote was really something that I was moved by. Professor Dunbar Ortiz says a nation of immigrants was a mid-20th century revisionist story that U.S. post-war administration scrambled to made up as U.S. post-war administration scrambled to conceal any trace of the United States colonialist roots, system of slavery, and continued segregation as they developed military and counterinsurgent strategies to quell national liberation movements in former European colonies. So this quote of this idea of the story that we tell ourselves in the United States, that this is a nation of immigrants, and including us, right, as children of immigrants, that this is a really dominant story that I was struck by this from Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz. And I also really began to recollect too Native Hawaiian studies and activist, Native Hawaiian studies scholar and activist Haunani K. Trask, who some of you, if you were here kind of at the top of the hour, were listening in on her incredibly powerful speech. I mean, I listened to that, and hopefully we can share the link at some point. But today, how many years later, listening to her just always moves me. But I part of this process, the pandemic, Amado's passing, this part of this process of trying to center indigenous or kind of environmental justice, meaning, kind of connecting to land and then connecting to settler colonialism, really had to kind of, do this deep work. And so, one of the things I recollected was this work, this speech that I actually heard by Haunani K. Trask. I was an undergraduate at the time, not much, just about Amado's age, working as I was an undergraduate or a student organizer, campus organizer at UC Santa Barbara. We had invited Haunani K. Trask to speak. She gave a speech not unlike the one that some of you might have heard, and hopefully we can share it. But it was just, something else. And I really, really, kind of went back to the speech, because the interesting thing is when I first heard her, she really shaped me as an activist and organizer. But interestingly, then in the 1990s, it didn't lead me necessarily into kind of indigenous solidarity work with US-based groups or into environmental justice. It kind of led me into another path. But, her speech, those words that kind of echo in Dunbar Ortiz's work, just really came back to me. And, one of the things I did was just, went back to her writing. So one of the things that Haunani K. Trask wrote was this poem, Settlers, Not Immigrants. And it's, settlers, not immigrants, from America, from Asia, come to settle, to take from the native, that which is native, land, water, women, sovereignty. Settlers, not immigrants, bringing syphilis and leprosy, Jehovah and democracy. Settlers, settling our native Hawaii, inscribing their lives of discovery, of penury, of victory. Settlers, not immigrants, killing us off, disease by disease, lie by lie, one by one. Going back to Haunani K. Trask's work, I think, what sometimes might be missed, but it's there. If you ever get a chance to listen to her 1993 speech, which was similar to the speech I listened to even as an undergraduate student at UC Santa Barbara when I was a campus organizer there, reading this poem, is that Haunani doesn't just talk about white settlers. She's also talking about Asians. She's referring to us. And I remember very clearly listening to Haunani K. Trask giving this talk. I mean, just being so moved. You just couldn't not be moved when you listen to her words. And I remember a very flustered, very emotional Pinay, who was born and raised in Hawaii. Remember her raising her hand on the verge of tears, really kind of reacting to Haunani K. Trask's talk, right? Telling us, like, y'all are settlers, and this young woman, she felt like attacked, right? Feeling like the settler term couldn't possibly apply to her, since after all, she was a granddaughter of Filipino migrants who had been brought to Hawaii to work as low-wage workers on plantations. And yet, Haunani K. Trask was saying, look, yes, and still there's a way you're connected to settler colonialism. And, I actually really agreed with her. I felt bad for this fellow Pinay really struggling with this. I could tell it had unsettled her. Haunani's speech, I was feeling unsettled too. And, as I said before, I mean, Haunani K. Trask really set me on a pathway around my own activism. And yet, even still, there's still a way. This immigrant narrative is super strong, it's so strong. And so, as a young college student, even though, I'm listening to this talk, I'm, really resonating with it. I'm really sitting with what it means. Yes, it's true. We're settlers. We're connected, somehow complicit with the system. The immigrant narrative can still be very, very powerful. So, imagine Haunani K. Trask comes to UC Santa Barbara as part of this, event I helped to organize. It's 1993, 94. And then not far from Santa Barbara, if you're familiar with Central Coast, California, not far from Santa Barbara is Morro Bay. So just a year after the talk or so, when I was at Santa Barbara listening to Haunani K. Trask, sitting with this idea of settler colonialism, how Asians might be complicit in that. Just a year after that, the Filipino Americans are celebrating the commemoration, this plaque marking at Morro Bay, a plaque commemorating the first landing of Filipinos, in North America. And, I remember too. So, that, wow, it was like super exciting. And a lot of people love to point to that history, like, oh my God, Filipinos have been on this continent for a very, very long time. There's something really kind of, it elicits all this pride in so many people. I remember as a college student, even as I'm listening to Haunani K. Trask, and that's sitting with me, the immigrant narrative is strong enough to just also make me not even see, what was actually problematic about the Morro Bay plaque, right? I was proud of it instead of really thinking about, and it took me over 2 decades of learning and unlearning to finally get to a different place, to actually think twice about the fact that we're kind of celebrating this moment, because actually, when you really look at the history, you find that Filipinos were very much complicit with the white settler colonial project that brought them to the shores of what became Morro Bay. They were actually, armed and, were working, of course, at the behest of the colonizers. So, of course, Filipinos were positioned very, very differently than the colonizers or white settlers. And yet, they were forced laborers, and yet they're still involved. And this is the thing we have to kind of still sit with, right? That this moment that marks this beginning that we celebrate is also this moment of white settler colonial violence, and how wittingly or unwittingly, chosen or not, whether it's a choice or not, we're there, we're involved, and we have to grapple with that very seriously. And that's really Dunbar, Ortiz, and Trask's what their point is when they're really trying to get us to be unsettled, right? To think about settler colonialism. They're saying that this is what happens when you have this dominant immigrant narrative. It dominates how we think about our experiences, not just as Filipinos, of course, speaking from my experience as a Filipino, but also as Asian Americans more broadly, that we can disappear. Certain things happen in that framework. Among the things, and I think this is a really great quote from Asian American scholars who are really critical of the complicity of Asians in settler colonialism, especially in the Hawaiian context. They're very well known by now, especially in Asian American studies. Candice Fujikani and Jonathan Okamura, they have a text entitled Asian Settler Colonialism, and they state, as we are inspired by our family histories of struggle, we also recognize that they entered into settler colony. However temporary or permanent they imagined that settlement to be, and that the large-scale entry of Asians into Hawaii, and the argument can also be made into the continent, was made possible by U.S. settler colonialism. So, why we titled this project, We Are Not Immigrants, for AKI, is, at least for me, is we really need to do this work of not identifying with this immigration narrative, not identifying with this concept of the U.S. as a nation of immigrants, because to do so is to really accept problematic settler logics, right? Part of what happens when we really accept this notion, the United States is a nation of immigrants, is that we buy into, when we buy into that, we're even obscuring the violence of white settler colonialism, for this context, but also the U.S. imperial violence of our own on our own ancestral homelands, which, in many ways brought a lot of us here to this country. When we buy into this sort of U.S. is a nation of immigrants or narrative, it also actually participates in environmental degradation in a way, especially because this idea of the U.S. as a nation of immigrants. There's this kind of, it's also attached to a kind of middle class aspirations of a home ownership, suburban living, all of that. Suburban living really leads to kind of land use that often results in the loss of local small farmlands, which then can lead to just decreased biodiversity. You have all these hyper manufactured green environments and kind of the waste of water and other kinds of resources for this suburban aesthetic that, we're kind of really encouraged to buy into. There's so much about suburban life that is hyper consumptive, right? All ways that forms of life and living and that really can participate in environmental degradation or the degradation of our natural resources. Another reason why, kind of immigrant narratives like, the U.S. is this nation of immigrants. Some of what also happens is there's kind of this distancing from the land, right? That somehow, if you immigrated to the United States, now you've arrived, you're trying to be modern, not backward. This idea is you evolve when you come to the U.S. and you kind of go from kind of a rural backward existence to kind of, more modern one, right? Even when we think about urban versus rural, right? These notions like urban as a genre typically, right, is ascribed to people of color. Rural, we think of as white. Like there are all of these ways that this narrative kind of, shapes how we think about who we are, who we can be. And so one of the things that happens is it really starts to distance us from any kind of relationship to the land or nature. And so that's, again, something that I think part of the unsettling requires that we by rejecting the immigrant narrative, it might allow us to really also unsettle all the other ways that it kind of makes us think about ourselves, about our community, about our futures. Another kind of way that this immigrant narrative can be really problematic is sometimes it just positions us kind of as just philanthropists, especially with respect to, say, climate disasters in our ancestral homelands. Because I'm speaking very much as a Filipino, but I think this is equally true for lots of other Asian diasporic groups. We might think of ourselves as, the more privileged Filipinos, our Filipinx people in comparison with our Philippine-based counterparts. And, what may happen is where instead of really trying to address the root problems that are the cause of the ravages of climate change in our ancestral homeland, we might actually, support other kinds of economic development, more capitalist forms of economic development, right? So sometimes there's this notion, right? Oh gosh, the Philippines, the reason why there's always a natural disaster in the Philippines is because it's so poor, it's underdeveloped, right? So let's give money for new kinds of businesses or whatever, to modernize the Philippines, right? And that notion doesn't necessarily help, right? Because it's precisely capitalist extraction, right? Neoliberal globalization. That is the reason for why the Philippines or many other places suffer from climate disaster. So, just to kind of track this whole trajectory that is rooted in this, my own personal story, and that it's kind of manifesting in our work through AKI. I'm really hoping that this project invites all of us to be more critical of this immigration narrative, to reject settler status, and to and continue to work to bolster indigenous solidarity locally, in addition to any kind of sort of solidarity work we do globally, and really have us think about how we can help to support the advancement of environmental justice. So, this project that we're launching today with this lecture, and you'll see later a series of lectures, is really inviting us to unsettle as Asians and really thinking about various forms of Asian unsettlement. As I was saying before, for me, this unsettlement process has taken kind of different forms. I do have to say that, when I first heard Haunani K. Trask, that was, again, very, very, life altering. So part of the trajectory, at least for me, was to begin to seek out the liberation struggle in my ancestral homeland. I figured, okay, I don't want to identify as an immigrant. I want to connect to my ancestral homeland. And so I went the route of really connecting with the liberation struggle in my ancestral homeland of the Philippines, the National Democratic Movement. The idea for me was that, the liberation of the Philippines is kind of a way that I was going to identify, not going to identify with the US per se, identify with this movement. But I think, and I think a lot of what happens actually for people who are connected to the National Democratic Movement of the Philippines is there is actually very much, which is, I think, very aligned with what Native activists are calling for, right? Aligned with a distancing from the immigrant narrative. So many Filipinos who, connected to the National Democratic Movement will say, no, we're not immigrants. We're forced migrants, right? And so, that's sort of the trajectory I took. And so at least for me, I'd really kind of done a lot of work. I was really and continue to be very anti-capitalist in my stance. And, when you kind of take that stance, environmental justice is necessarily kind of connected to being sort of anti-capitalist or critical of capitalism, I think. But at the same time, so much of my work really centered social justice and really focused on people, which it should focus on, because there is a way that, of course, capitalism is so deeply anti-people. And so a lot of the work I've done in connection to like the ND movement, the National Democratic Movement, is about calling for pro-people policies, a pro-people system. And I think one of the things I've learned, and I think this is a learning that that I think Amado really gave me in kind of connecting with really rooting in the indigenous people's struggle as part of the broader national the struggle for liberation, is not just centering people, but really centering also other living things, thinking about the Philippines and that liberation, but also thinking about the planet and what is really planetary liberation. And so I think this is kind of where my thinking has really shifted a lot, where it's both this kind of connection to this liberation struggle, also about social justice, supporting humanity, but really expanding who is the fight is for, or what the fight is for, and that the fight is for life that is not just inclusive of human life, but really also inclusive of the entirety of the many, many living things that we live in relation with. And so, at least for me, as I narrate my story, this is kind of where I've started to come to be, where I'm starting to, really center environmental justice much more in how I think, even in my daily life, this connection to the land, regenerative farming. This is sort of how my own journey. And among the things that, again, we're doing here through AKI is to facilitate kind of work that especially allows us to unsettle, right? Be in better connection with indigenous communities, not only globally, but very locally. And so, we are going to be doing this work of really humbly listening to and learning from the indigenous communities in our vicinity and supporting their work in building their sovereignty through this project. For me, I think for AKI, we are in a moment of climate crisis. This has been a crisis ongoing. And if the pandemic didn't already get us concerned and terrified, we need to be now. And so, I want to shift. That was sort of my story about, how I started to kind of come to center environmental justice in kind of my life and my organizing, and why it's sort of central to AKI. I want to also talk about just other forms of environmental justice that's being done in the Asian Americans community, because there's really all sorts. And I'll go this really kind of rather quickly, and maybe we could share out the slides later. But, environmental justice is a term that really came out of people of color becoming more and more central to the environmental movement. In a lot of ways, environmental movement often just kind of delimited their thinking about environmental justice to just nature, and not even necessarily nature, just nature, and not even thinking about land, right? Or like native dispossession from the land. So the environmental justice movement really brings us a much more expansive, definition of environmental justice that includes both public and human health concerns. So that means like exposure of farm workers to pesticides and lead, in addition to kind of, the issues related to access to natural resources such as air, land, and water. This expansive view, ultimately repudiates the elitist, racist, and classist wilderness or preservationist dichotomy that was really dominant in the environmental movement, because that's sort of a distinctive movement, the environmental movement, as opposed to environmental justice movement. And it still exists. There's still these dichotomies, but environmental justice is a little more encompassing. And so just in terms of the various organizations, I mean, what's really been amazing is, Asian Americans have been really doing amazing environmental justice work for several decades now. The environmental justice framework really came in the 90s. And since the 90s, we've continued to see lots of different kinds of work. There's just some important kind of figures here, like Young Shin, who is the ED of the Asian Immigrant Women Advocates, Pam Tao Lee, who went to found the APEN and Asian and Pacific Environmental Network, along with the Chinese Progressive Alliance and Just Transition Alliance. And actually, she was also a leading figure in the International Committee for Human Rights in the Philippines, and many, many things. But these two individuals, along with groups like the Silicon Valley Toxics Coalition from the 90s to the 2000s, really started to bring in the issue of occupational issues as environmental issues. For Silicon Valley Toxics Coalition, for example, one of the big issues that they were raising was the fact that, a lot of immigrant and Asian immigrant and Latino immigrant women were working on these assembly lines and were really being exposed, all these semiconductor chip assembly lines, and exposed to all sorts of toxins. It was similarly true even for textile and apparel workers, Asian immigrant women, also exposed to fiber particles and other kinds of chemicals, leading to all these respiratory illnesses. But the point is that environmental justice frame meant, look, we have to also think about workplace health and safety. And that's something that Asian American activists really did. APEN continues to exist to this day. Noted earlier that, Pam Tao Lee was one of the founders of APEN. One of the projects of APEN was a Laotian organizing project. And so, so one of the things that they were really doing and continue to do, actually, there's a lot of organizing still happening in Richmond like this, but organizing and mobilizing youth in the Laotian community, because in Richmond, that Chevron oil refinery has been a major, major, major source of pollution and different kinds of industrial accidents. Apparently, for young people actually in Richmond, they have an alarm that goes off when the air is so toxic due to the refinery. I think actually that alarm was even because of activist work, because prior to that, it was like people were just walking around outside and being exposed without any warning that maybe they should go in and kind of cover up. But oh yeah, there it is, right? I'm thinking I jumped ahead and wasn't even reading the slide, but this is a really successful campaign to just get this warning system in place, because it's not like Chevron was going to do it for the community if they didn't mobilize. So that's an exciting project from APEN. There were other organizations like the Committee Against Anti-Asian Violence, or CAV, in New York. One of the things they did is say, through this environmental justice framing, it's like, look, environmental justice also means how access to housing and the impacts of gentrification, right? That for them, basic environmental issue, there's a basic environmental issue at play when you're talking about poor housing and substandard living conditions in like tenement buildings or other kinds of, structures. And so, Asian American environmental justice organizers have really looked at, issues of housing, not just affordable housing, but also just housing conditions as an issue of struggle. And this has gone on for years. So this is one example. As an example, there's a Chinatown Evictions Committee that was in the early 2000s in Oakland. You have in other parts of the East Coast, in Chinatown, of Boston, Chinatown, and Philadelphia. And then again, in Oakland, more recently, you've just seen a lot of environmental justice, Asian American environmental justice organizing around housing and urban redevelopment issues. And so among the things has been, struggles against the erection, the building of like major coliseums, and that kind of impact on people's ability to have access to affordable housing. And I do, have to circle back to Amado. I mean, this is sort of his iconic image now that we use a lot, but it was taken when he was speaking at a rally because he was one of the leaders in the Stay the Right Way coalition that was really trying to that fought against and won against the development, the expansion of the A's Coliseum in Oakland. And that's why he was sort of his image was captured in this mural, because a lot of people really attributed his leadership to the successful that successful campaign, which really, saved Chinatown, Oakland from the encroachment of the Coliseum. Other kind of organizations still, people doing work around really thinking about environmental justice and with respect to kind of food and food justice. So, different organizations have sort of come and gone, but, there's like this one. But, today we're seeing new forms of environmental justice organizing. I mean, what's really, of course, a lot of us know about Larry Itliong. Some of you may have already seen Larry the Musical, know about Larry Itliong's work as a leader in fighting for farm workers' rights, which included, addressing some of the issues related to the toxins that migrant farm workers were experienced. But part of what's happening now is for the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren of farm workers is the impact of industrial capitalist agriculture in the Central Valley and what it has done in terms of just air quality and water quality in the Central Valley region. One of the things that, as a consequence of capitalist agriculture in Central Valley, is poor air quality. Many people being born in the valley with asthma, including our very, very dear historian Don Mabalon, who died at the age of 48 due to an asthma attack. But the organization that she helped to found, Little Manila, has now really shifted or has opened up much more work in environmental justice to really address all of the impacts of industrial agriculture on the community. And so they've got this urban forestry program. They also have this sort of Skywatch program, really kind of like tracking air quality, So again, I want to still have some time for some conversation, but really great work that's happening right now. So even if different projects have come and gone over the last 30 years, we're seeing, new kinds of work happening and really, really exciting and inspiring work happening, especially in the Central Valley with Little Manila Rising. We also see, a new generation of Asian Americans working in farming, but really trying to reverse all of the ways that industrial capitalist agriculture has, how it's approached food production. And so you have people who are very much think of themselves as sustainable, as not just sustainable farmers, but land stewards. You have Brave New Seed, Kelly Tseng, Scott Chang, Fleeman of the Shao Shan Farms, Z Lilani of Kula Nursery, our good friends at Namo Farms also, and even Reimagination Farm as part of this kind of growing set of people trying to do to remake this relationship and to restore the land. Of course, there's also the continued work of continuing to support global, indigenous solidarity globally, organizations like the Liang Network. I think I see on this call Brandon Lee, and he will be one of our major speakers, because part of course, being at the front lines of alongside with indigenous land defenders in the Philippines is the risk of violence on the part of the state. And Brandon Lee was targeted for his activism. Brandon is Chinese American, was inspired like Amado to continue to live, learn, and fight alongside indigenous communities in the Philippines, and ended up being the target of an assassination attempt. So, the work of what we're doing here, where we're living, making these connections even globally, really, really vital in order to, not only uplift the very particular or to advance the struggles of indigenous communities for self-determination, but really their work and their knowledge in really saving our earth from the horrible destruction it has been subjected to under the systems that dominate our world today. So, one of the things I wanted to kind of just ask folks to maybe pop into the chat, or if anybody was feeling brave, was just to tell us your environmental justice stories, if you like. We have time till 1/2 the top of the hour, 6:30 at least for us. What kinds of activism or community organizing are you doing, or that you know about? Are you interested in getting involved? Now, if you're interested in getting involved, please sign our interest form. We're really thinking about what it can look like through Amado Khaya to support a membership-based organization for folks who are really wanting to do more work at the intersection of indigenous solidarity and environmental justice. So I will end there. Maybe before I go on, but again, we do have this whole project that includes numerous speakers, indigenous folks, different environmental justice organizers, folks who are really also trying to tackle kind of settler colonialism. So we have a bunch of people here. Actually, 2 of them I think are here already, Brandon Lee, and I thought I also saw Dr. Ryan Boyko in the room. So we'll be hearing from them as part of the lecture series, along with Dr. Kutcha Reisling Baldi and Dr. Caitlin Reed. We actually have more speakers that we're confirming right now. It's going to be very, very exciting webinar series. But before I take up too much time, let's definitely open space. I just end there. Open space for you to share your stories and give you an opportunity to sign up if you're interested in getting more involved. But thank you all for listening, for your patience at the top of the presentation as I was dealing with Mercury and what is it? Retrograde. I don't know. Tech issues. But it's always lovely to be in space with everyone. So I'll end there. Thank you, everybody. Yay, 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 yay. Thank you for the contribution, Summer. Absolutely. To think about that the U.S. does send trash and recyclables to Southeast Asia, including the Philippines. So, definitely something when it comes to what kind of work we can be doing here in the U.S. These are the kinds of issues that connect us to our ancestral homeland. Right. And so absolutely important issues to pay attention to mobilize around. Thank you. And again, please share, if some of you are already doing different kinds of environmental justice work, really love to hear from you. Thank you to Maria for sharing, organizing in Portland to increase transparency and accountability. Yes, in city budgets, absolutely. This is an effort to ensure that community members can have direct decision making on how our public dollars are spent. So really doing work around community budgeting or the people's budget, participatory budgeting. This is a real thing because, these decisions that get made around public dollars, we're not always part of as members of local communities. And that's right. Environmental justice, housing, health, education, and other priorities are often being ignored. So really, the important work of working and organizing at the city level or the municipal level. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing, because, of course, as we saw, Asian Americans doing work in environmental justice, among the issues that they're trying to tackle is housing, and livable housing, affordable housing, even access to parks. Right, cities get to decide on whether they're going to invest in parks and green areas in different parts of the city, and that's really, really important to the health of the community. So we have a contribution here, somebody who went to Davis, learning different concepts that help them to put more words, just in terms of knowing who the colonizers are, and their understanding of settler colonialism in the Philippines and Turtle Island. So one of the things is they're sharing that when they were living in Chico, were able to connect with indigenous traditional ecological knowledge practitioners there, and ones in the Bay. Thank you for sharing that, May. Yes. And not May, but I'm sorry, Lauren. And Lauren is currently working with them for their senior project. So that's really, really, really exciting. Lauren, please, if you're able to share specific organizations that you're part of, I think it's so important for us to know who they are. Actually, here with Amado Khaya, that is also something we're trying to cultivate, and we're hoping that we can get one of the speakers from the TERRA, the tribal ecological, shoot, I can't recall the acronym now. And I'm I'm fond of acronyms, but it's TERRA. But they do work basically training people in the community with a priority for natives on traditional approaches to fire mitigation, because there are all of these ways that Native people, the Native Pomo, had developed approaches to managing the landscape as a means of preventing the possibilities of widespread fires. So really, there it is, the Tribal Eco Restoration Alliance. So that's hopefully we're going to be able to hear from them. So thank you so much, Lauren, for sharing that. Yet another connection for us to make out here, kind of broadly in Northern California. Any other kind of sharings people or kind of thoughts people want to share, please. Don't be shy. Oh, hi, Isaac Olson. Thank you. Did you want to get off mute or to ask your question?
Can you hear me? Sorry.
I can hear you okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I really love the talk, and what I'm doing right now at the University of Washington really intersects with this. We're trying to organize against the military demonstrations this coming summer in Hawaii as part of RIMPAC, because we're really working on trying to underscore the connections between imperialism and colonialism and environmental degradation.
Yes.
And a lot of that work is so connected, and people have not gotten to organize these intersectional issues as much as I'd have hoped, coming as someone who's really thinking about all of the ways that our very presence in some of these communities is damaging and has been damaging for such a long time. And I'm excited that more young people are getting into this sort of work, connecting all of these disparate issues. So I'm really excited to be organizing against things like U.S. militarism and the ways that it's damaging local frontline communities, and especially aspects of indigenous lands, indigenous sovereignty, and products of the Asian American diaspora. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing. It was really inspiring.
Isaac, please put the information, like, please, if there's a way that the Amado Khaya Initiative can plug in, or we can have you speak, please share your information with us. This is, we created this contact form because we want to engage people. I think if you learn anything from my story, is that it's important to at some point you learn and you act, and in time, part of your practice, your organizing practice, will be shaped and reshaped. You sharpen some of your analysis as partly conditions change, and also as you develop, in terms of your own understanding. So this is absolutely important that we, for folks who are here who want to be able to plug in, please, everybody please share what you can do, or just campaigns that people might potentially participate in, or that we can, share through our networks with Amado Khaya, because it's important for us to, at some point, what does that say? Analysis paralysis is a real thing, probably even more so for your generation in a way that was less true for mine. So, if there's something that moves you here, get involved. Then you take a moment, reflect on your practice, get it better, then, shift and change and grow. But the stakes are high, that we need to engage on some level. Thank you for this comment. Yes, and not necessarily not really involved necessarily in environmental justice. Would love to. Yay. Thank you for that. I'm thinking about, yes, how the wildfires and how Indigenous people have knowledge. Yes. And yet it's banned. That's right. So, there are all of the ways that Indigenous knowledges are always sidelined, right? Because of these really racist notions about kind of Indigenous knowledge, as if it's not science, even though these are tried and tested approaches, tested far longer than probably many Western scientists have had to test certain kinds of interventions. So, absolutely, it is troubling that we, and really, we do a great disservice to ourselves when we ban really vital knowledge from Indigenous communities. Thank you. Hi, Hal with LFS. Yeah, one of the orgs that, I helped to start back in the day, a couple years after that Haunani K. Trask speech. I'm telling you, she set me on a path, and helped with the connections I ended up making. But yay. But no, don't know. It's okay if you're not always active in the organizations that you were with. And so a lot of the members have taken a class called Health and Wellness for Pacific Islanders, and a lot of the readings we do in that class are about Indigenous methodologies in conjunction with Western sciences and how much their healing is tied to them. Thank you for that. Hal, if you're able to share that reading list, we'd love to be able to share it back with people who participated. And, no shame, again, in taking a little bit of a break. It happens. Life happens. This is, we always talk about it, the struggle as a marathon. It's real. You have to you have to be able to sometimes, go at a slower pace in order to, continue going. That certainly I can speak from my own experience. I've been, organizing since probably your age, when I was in my late teens, early 20s. And life happened. I had a child, another child, lost a child, lost a parent. Things happen. And you have to take a break. But it doesn't ever, shake. It's sort of like you can't unsee the Matrix, right? What is that? Like, I don't know. That's such an old reference, but it's a classic. It's iconic. But anyway, it's hard to not care after you've done work in organizations like that. But please share if you like. Really would really love to just expand our knowledge. I don't know everything. And I'm in this new space of learning myself. So everything that I've shared with you in a lot of ways is new learnings for myself as well. we're all learning. The learning will never stop. So, really, really appreciate what people are learning in other spaces. I've shared what I know, but I don't know everything. So, really, really looking forward to folks sharing when you can. Thank you. Any other kind of comments or questions? Yeah, never stop learning. My mom, bless her heart, she passed away. Relatively recently. She was in her 70s when she signed up for an online course to get her doctorate. I will never, I love that. Pretty much, I think her philosophy was, you only stop learning when you die. And probably when you die, you have more learning on the other side. Anyway, so yes, never stop learning. We have a little more time till we're kind of officially done with this. Really enjoyed your talk. Thank you. Currently a major in CRD, organize in affordable housing initiatives and Vietnamese language services in San Jose Bay Area. Yeah. Yeah. When I take environmental science planning classes, I often ignore EJ. Yes. And the intersections of race and environment. Yes. Yes. We could talk about that, Emma. That's a real thing. That happens in that space. Totally encourage you, if you didn't already take courses already in the ethics studies, please do. You have a lovely, amazing professor here, Professor Gayang Chung, who's here, who can, help with that work. Yay, you're a double major. Yay, ASA needs those majors, but great to hear that, because we do continue to need to push in those spaces, because absolutely they do not look at these intersections. So thank you for sharing. Any other things folks want to share? I love this. Yay. This is the kind of teaching I always want to do. It just makes me so happy. Okay, let's see. Maria again, just to give a sense of what activism is looking like right now, carrying a clipboard and asking people. Yes. She just signed an initiative petition to get community budgeting on the ballot in November. 60,000 signatures needed. Next time you see someone with a clipboard, it's just another form of trying to get direct democracy in motion. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for saying that or writing that, Maria. Organizing is a lot of work. And as much as the internet, social media has helped to support organizing, at the end of the day, there is something, when it comes to some of this work, they're not going to take 60,000 signatures, that come through, like, I don't know, they're not going to take 60,000 likes on a post. We're still going to need to engage actual warm bodies of people who are signing signatures. It's really work. It's tedious work. Sometimes work people don't like to do. And yet so much of, the work that we need to advance justice, social justice, environmental justice requires that kind of work. Certainly, for me, a lot of our work is as land stewards, put in the work. I have like a busted thumb. A lot of it is this, really working in relation to the land to restore it. You can't just frolic in the lavender. It's really the work of restoring what this society has taken from the land in just a short span of time. Getting things on the ballot, yep, and on paper, absolutely. Thank you, Alyssa. Thank you for the talk. Environmental science major, yes. Expanded approach to, oh yes, and I think we have a talk afterwards, Alyssa. When I close the room for everybody else, please stay so we can talk, Alyssa. Yes, definitely looking at the public health impacts, absolutely. Such an important thing. We're just not always paying attention to some of these issues in our there's ways that our communities aren't thought of when these kinds of impacts are happening. So thank you for that, Alyssa. I'm looking forward to chatting you right after we end. But I think we're all, we have just about a minute. I want to put up the slide again for our next set of speakers. This is going to be awesome. I'm really, I have to just say, I'm so thankful for the ways that I've been growing and learning as an organizer, as an activist. And, one of the things that I had to know, that I noticed is like what I don't know, with every land acknowledgement, I've been saying, as you know, that's become kind of something more popular in the last few years. The truth of the matter is how much I personally really understood the Native histories of the communities I've ever been part of has been lacking. And so we at Amado Khaya Initiative are really holding space for us to come humbly to listen and learn and build relationships. And so, you know, it's exciting that we're able to do this because we're hoping this can also foster kind of like what Amado did when he went to the Philippines, sharing the story of Standing Rock. We also hope to share with indigenous folks that we're connecting with about the indigenous struggle in the Philippines and around the world, and really build these relationships. So excited to be able to hold space like that. If we sign up for today's session, will we get recordings for every session in the webinar? Yes, yes, yes. So, you know, you'll be able to kind of be there live or look at our recording at a later time. But it is now 6:30. If you haven't already had a chance to fill out the interest form, please do so. We don't want to send you information if that's not of interest to you, but if you are, we'd love to talk with you. We had learned just in the chat in the last half hour about lots of different other campaigns that we might be able to plug people into if you're from those areas. So thank you all for spending this evening. Really, really love that you all were able to commit this time. Thank you, Renee. Thank you as an Amplify Fellow and all of the fellows, you know, hoping that this can help you as you start to continue to develop the ideas for the podcast you're working on. Yay, thank you. And, you know, yes, please visit us if you like at Reimagination Farm. All of the Reimagination Farm events, anything that we generate there through the farm, a portion comes back to Amado Khaya. So, you know, it's a great opportunity to learn and be in relation to the land. We like to hold space in that way. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Hal. Thank you. Thank you. Kat. Thank you. Isaac, thank you again. Isaac, please, information about the work you're doing in Washington. Lauren, JT, thank you, Anna and Angela for always holding things down for me, making my slides pretty as I try to think about the talk. Thank you, Summer. Thank you, Daniela, Scott. Yes, thank you, Kayang. Can't wait to see you. Maybe Scott, I'll see both of you, I hope, at AAAS in Seattle. Thank you, Emma. Thank you all. And so if people don't mind, I have a meeting with Alyssa after this. So once you all go, Alyssa and I will be able to have a conversation together. But it's so wonderful. Thank you so much. Can't wait to continue to build with you all over the course of this project. Yeah. Yay, that was a good thing. Oh, I can stop the recording now. Huh? Oh, yes. Let me stop the recording. Oh,